Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching a very special series to mark 100 years of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. As we all know, this is the 100th year of existence of the RSS, and over the last century, this organization has actually played a fairly significant role, sometimes very positively, sometimes in a negative manner. At the moment, this organization and its huge group of affiliates, about more than 40 organizations, which includes the ruling party in India, that is the Bharatiya Janata Party, are virtually controlling Indian politics and the socio-political discourse of the country. To mark this occasion, we are running a series of interviews with various scholars who have studied Hindu nationalistic politics from various sides, looking at various aspects of it. The Hindu nationalist leaders, normally make out that the idea of Hindutva, which is actually the ideology of the Hindu nationalistic organizations, is actually completely home produced, in the sense that it is completely grown from within the country, that it is actually evolved out of this own land. But there have been very significant influences from Europe, of European fascism, of Italian fascism, and German fascism, to be very specific. We will be talking about this aspect, one little facet of this also. We will be talking today to Professor Marzia Casolari, who's an Italian scholar who has studied Indian Hindu nationalistic politics and worked at the various linkages between the Italian fascist movement of the 20th century and the Hindu nationalistic politics, and other national leaders also who had influences or who interacted with Italian ultra nationalistic groups. Welcome to this program, Professor Marzia Casolari. It's a real privilege to be speaking with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
I would like to start on the point that to what extent, the very elementary question, that to what extent were our Indian Hindu nationalistic leaders greatly inspired by, European fascism of your country, Italy, and also of Germany, that's Nazism, in the 1930s and subsequent periods. What were the level of influences? You have studied and you have written an entire book on that particular subject.
Thank you. I think talking about influences from fascism on Hindu nationalism, we should start from BS Moonje, who came to Italy in 1931, going back to India from the Round Table Conference in London. And as many other Indian leaders, he met Mussolini in Rome.
Okay.
But before that, or before and after meeting the Mussolini, the so-called the Duce, that means the leader, no, the Führer. Anyway, after meeting Mussolini, before and after meeting Mussolini, BS Moonje visited the military academies, Italian military academies, but especially he visited the militant organizations of fascism. Youth, especially youth organizations of fascism. They were the Balilla and Avanguardisti, and they were organizations where youths were trained, and they used to perform paramilitary drills. Paramilitary drills that were they aimed at training youths to fight with with enemies, with internal enemies like anti-fascists and so on. So they belonged to some hooligan. They acted as hooligans who actually attacked anti-fascists and opponents. No.
Okay.
So they used to wear a uniform and to perform these drills, and they were indoctrinated by fascism. So Moonje was, I read in daily the Moonje's notebooks, And in his notebook, he wrote that as soon as he would be back to India, he would reshape the RSS according to the features of the Italian fascist organizations.
Okay.
And I mentioned these lines in my book also. So I think that he was primarily, I mean, the RSS was primarily inspired not just by the fascist ideology, but by the fascist organization. How
By
fascist,
the structure also.
the organization of the militancy. Okay.
Okay.
And the second point, always regarding BS Moonje, is that he was fascinated by the military issues, basically, and by his purpose, his goal was militarizing the Hindu society. Actually, his slogan was militarize Hindu society, Hinduize the Hindudom. So
Okay.
militarization and Hinduization of the Indian masses was his objective, basically. Okay, the objective was of his political engagement, so to say.
Okay.
Then, on another side, there are several aspects that we can examine from the Indian point of view, from the Indian side, and from the Italian side too. So. The other aspect is the ideological influence, not just from Nazism.
Before we go into the ideological, aspect of this, can I ask you, that after B.S. Moonje returned to India from Italy, he interacted with the founder of RSS, K.V. Hedgewar, who was actually, a
Yeah.
disciple of his. Moonje used to be the mentor of Hedgewar right from the time that Hedgewar was a very young person.
Yeah.
So that engagement continued, and it was basically because of what he saw in Italy that they established some military schools with the twin functions, as you said, that is to militarize the Hindus and to further Hinduization of the masses. That was the aim of this military school.
Yes, it was I mean, yeah, Moonje worked very intensively to found the Bonsla military school, and he got also funds from several parts.
Mostly military school, you said.
Bonsla military school in Maharashtra. And yeah, the objective of the purpose of that school was militarizing the Hindu boys. And
Okay.
it was meant for Hindus, not for Muslims.
Now, let me step back a bit. You talked about B.S. Moonje's visit in 1931 when he was returning from the Roundtable Conference in London. But it is not that Indian nationalists did not have, contacts earlier than this with various Italian fascist groups. For instance, there are accounts, and you have researched on this, Rabindranath Tagore's interactions during his journeys to Italy. He interacted with the emerging Italian fascist leaders in the second decade of the 20th century. Can you tell us a bit about it as to how these early contacts with Indian nationalist leaders and very iconic Indian leaders, nationalists, happened?
Well, in my book, I don't mention the Tagore's affair because another other scholars worked on it, Mario Pryor and Gianni Sofri. They wrote about it. Sofri wrote also about Gandhi's visit, Gandhi's meeting with Mussolini. But anyway, the Rabindranath Tagore story is very sad because you know that Rabindranath Tagore was an advocate of peace,
Yes.
and he was a very peaceful man, basically. I don't know what he expected by meeting Mussolini and dealing with the fascist regime. Perhaps, I mean, he came to Italy in a very early phase when fascism perhaps abroad was not so well known. No, it's an aggressive organization, racist and so on, so violent and so on. But his visit to Italy, he visited Italy twice. The second visit was exploited because I'm just summing up, because the regime, especially two fellows, two scholars of Indology and Sanskrit and so on, who were Carlo Formichi and Giuseppe Tucci, two very famous Italian scholars. They tried to exploit Rabindranath Tagore's visit, and they tried to, to present Rabindranath Tagore like a kind of supporter of the fascist regime. So they used Tagore's visit as a propaganda issue.
By the Italian fascist groups.
Because Carlo Formichi and Giuseppe Tucci were very active in Bengal. And actually, their work and their activity was part of the Italian propaganda in India. So all this picture is part of the Italian policy in India, because when we talk about the relations between Italian fascism and Indian radical nationalism, we should not forget that the Italian fascist regime was very interested in spreading its image, in promoting its image, and in developing contacts, especially with the prominent leaders of Indian nationalism. You must think about Subhas Chandra Bose, and Netaji's connections with the regime have been widely studied by many scholars, and that's one of the reasons why I don't devote much space in my book to Subhas.
We will definitely talk about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's relationship with the Italian leaders of the 1920s, 30s, and not the even the 40s also, because the war period is very important. He returned to Italy at that time. We will talk about it. You have mentioned, the visit of Giuseppe Tucci to India. What role did he play exactly? Can you tell? And what was the visit to India aimed for?
So Tucci was first of all a scholar, and he was an appreciated scholar. I personally don't have any. I mean, nowadays Tucci's studies are a bit old-fashioned, but anyway, he was considered a very good scholar.
Okay.
And he had an ambiguous relationship with the regime, because he was paid, first of all. So his travels to India were financially supported by the regime. I found, and I mentioned also the figures that he received from the government, from the Italian government. And he received tens of thousands of liras. That at that time, I mean, an average salary, a very high salary at that time was 1,000 lira, 1,000 lira per month. And if you had 1,000 lira, you were a rich man, okay? So he got tens of thousands of liras to do his, to carry out his travels and research there. Then he was appointed at the Calcutta University, if I remember well, as a professor, and his duty was to promote Italy and fascism, and creating, a circle, building up a circle of Indian young intellectuals who were supposed to become loyal to the fascist regime and to become multipliers, promoters of the fascist regime in Italy, in India. What was the purpose of this policy? This was basically Italian propaganda in India was part of the Italian anti-British policy that fascism carried out in India and in the Middle East too.
Okay.
Okay, so in the main, area of British imperialism, both India and the Middle East. But obviously, Italy was more interested in undermining the British position in the Middle East, because Italy at that time considered the Mediterranean as a natural expansion space of Italy.
Okay. What was the role of the Italian, the embassy here, or whatever was the kind of agencies which were there working in India for the Italian government? What role were they playing also? Were they also officially trying to promote it? And if they were trying to promote Italian fascism, then what was the reaction of the British colonial forces?
There were no embassies because India was a colony, so
Yes, that's it.
it was the empire. So
There was some
foreign
kind of an office here.
Italy had only consulates. There was
Okay.
a consulate general in Calcutta, and the Italian consulate general in Calcutta was very notorious because it was very active in spreading Italian propaganda and in publishing pamphlets on Italy, promoting the image of Italy and of the regime, fascist regime, and Mussolini, and so on. Very active. Bose had been one of the, the organizers of Italian propaganda in Calcutta, but other figures, some of them were not really expelled by the British, but they were I think one of them was expelled also from India by the British authorities. So that was the role. That was Calcutta and Bengal were the first area where the fascist regime was active in India, where the Italian anti-British propaganda started in India. And the second area was Bombay, at that time
Yes.
Bombay, now Mumbai. So there was another consulate general that started to act later in the late 1930s. While in Calcutta, the Italian policy started much earlier in the 1920s. In Bombay, it started about 10 years later.
Later.
And getting in touch with obviously with the local political milieu, imitating to some extent the activities that had been started earlier in Calcutta. But I think that the Italian politicians didn't get. They were
They
not
were
much
not very
aware.
successful. They
Sorry?
were not very They were not very successful in spreading the idea of Italian fascism in India, were they?
No, they weren't aware. They were aware about the impact of their propaganda in Bengal, but they were not aware about the positive image that the fascist regime had in Maharashtra. So I want to mean that the regime underestimated the popularity of the fascist regime in Maharashtra.
Yes. In your book, you have actually talked about how Italian fascism was written about in various Marathi publications, which is a kind of an indication as to what was the popularity of the idea of Italian fascism on Indian nationalist leaders and the general people. What can you tell us about it, please?
Well, apart from a biography of Mussolini, written in Marathi, Mussolini anni fascismo, then I went through the Marathas articles, the newspaper Marathas
In
articles.
newspaper Maratha. It used to be published from Pune, right?
Yeah. Maratha published a series of articles on Mussolini and on the fascist regime, especially on the fascist regime, describing how the regime was successful in developing Italy, describing the social programs of the fascist regime, and describing fascism as the political movement and organization, and the fascist regime as the subject who transformed the Italian political scene from a chaotic one to a very organized, and the society, and the Italian society as a organized and orderly society.
And what was the image of Italian fascism and also of Nazism in various Indian papers which you read as a part of your research into this area? What kind of a public image were they projecting?
Well, there were some, the Indian press was various. No, there was the press. First of all, I examined especially the press in English because I don't know
Yes.
Bengali and not even Marathi.
Yes,
I
yeah.
know a little bit of Hindi, but
Yes.
I think that there were articles in. I'm sure. I mean, in Kesari there were articles on the fascist regime in Marathi. Sorry. Well, the regime supported some specific newspapers, especially, for instance, in Bengal, the Amrita Bazar Patrika. And the Amrita Bazar Patrika published regularly pro-fascist articles in.
Funded by the Italian government,
Yeah, yes. It was supported by the Italian consulate.
and the Italian consulate was financing Amrita Bazar Patrika, and the British government did not, the British administration did
No,
not take any action to stop this.
they tried to stop it, and actually that's why an official of the Italian consulate was expelled from India, because he was the main organizer of the Italian propaganda over there. But there was, as far as I know, there was no official, no official complaint from the British government to the Italian government. I don't know why.
Okay.
Perhaps
Uh,
because they didn't have the real evidence of what there was a suspect, and I know that we know that Italy was really active. The Italian government was really active because we know it from the Italian records. But the British were not fully aware. I mean, they had the suspicion that Italy was carrying out those activities, but they didn't have the evidence. But now we historians, we scholars have the evidence because we saw the Italian government documents. You know?
okay. Let's move. So you're talking about Subhash Chandra Bose and his interactions with Italian fascists over various years. Starting from the 1930s till well into the 1940s. Would you please tell us something about the various occasions of interactions and what was the outcome of all this? Will you tell us about between Bose and the Italian fascist uh, party and the government?
Well, Subhas Chandra Bose came to Italy several times in several periods before being arrested in India, and then that he escaped when he was liberated. It was released from arrest.
He
That
escaped from arrest,
he escaped
and Bose, he
from
escaped and
India
then
through
eventually went via Afghanistan,
yeah,
Russia.
yeah. So
He eventually reached Germany, and
yes,
also he came to Italy also around that time
yes.
again.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
So that was the relationship he had with the Italian regime. He was one of the organizers, the main organizers of the Congress of the Asian students in Rome in 1933, when the Institute for the Middle and Extreme Orient, ISMEO, was founded. And ISMEO was founded under the patronage of Giovanni Gentile. Giovanni Gentile was the main and perhaps the only intellectual of fascism. He had been Minister of Education, and he was very close to Giuseppe Tucci. So the
okay.
director of the ISMEO, of the Institute of the Middle and the Extreme Orient, that officially was a center for the study of Asian languages, but it was a hub of Italian propaganda in these countries. So the ISMEO and the British authorities watched very carefully the activities of ISMEO. The Congress of the Asian Student was watched by the British authorities in Rome, because I saw the British records in London, and they were carefully checking what the Italian government was doing. And one of
Right.
perhaps the main organizer of this event was not perhaps, he was the main organizer of this event, Subhas Bose. So this was a relationship he had, and with the personal relation he had with Mussolini also. So Mussolini relied very much upon him.
Relied for what? What did
Before
Mussolini
his
expect?
visit,
Relied, you were saying that. So, what did he expect that Bose would be able to do to spread the idea of Italian fascism in India and among Indian nationalists?
well, you know that Subhas Chandra Bose was in charge of organizing. I mean, he founded the INA, no?
Yes.
So the fascist regime was, and especially Mussolini, was expecting that the INA could actually, uh, you know, carrying
Secure
out
power in India.
a huge upsurge against the British, a huge
Yeah,
armed
create,
upsurge
and
against
create
the
a
British.
government in, come to power in India, secure independence, and be an ally of Italy. That is what Mussolini thought.
No, the point was not if Bose could get the power in India or not. The point was if Bose and his INA would be able to overthrow the British from India.
Okay,
That was the expectation. And
that was
it was expectation from both sides, from Bose to have the support of the Nazis and fascist regime to, you know, uh, organize the overthrow of the British in India. And at least Mussolini expected Bose to have the capacity to do that. But when Bose went to Germany in order to get a relevant, a meaningful support from the Nazi regime, then he was disappointed because Hitler basically didn't trust him. Because in spite of the fact that Indians were, and especially Northern Indians, were Aryans, no, but he didn't trust colored Aryans, no, he trusted only fair and blonde and blue eyes Aryans,
because the
and actually,
racial,
Subhash was
racial
not.
for
So
racial reasons, Hitler
it was,
did
they
not
were
trust.
second level Aryans. Perhaps Hitler was not even aware that Indians were Aryans. Anyway, we can't consider Netaji as a fascist or a pro-fascist or influenced by fascism. He was a kind of hybrid between socialism and fascism, perhaps from the
Hybrid
ideological
between
point of view.
socialism and fascism. That is what you think Subhash Chandra Bose was. Is that right?
Yeah, perhaps more socialist than fascist. Then he tried to, his purpose was being supported by the strong regimes. No,
Okay.
actually, Germany and Italy were enemies of Britain, of the UK.
Yes.
So he expected to have a meaningful support from these two countries because he believed that they had his same objective, that
Of
was
throwing out the British,
yes.
defeating the British. That was the common objective. So he thought that there could be some kind of a partnership. Let us now try to understand, that we are seeing that Indian nationalists, especially the Hindu nationalists, were definitely somehow influenced by fascists in Italy as well as in Germany. They were influenced. To what extent do you think that this influence was? Did they actually bring about in India and articulate some kind of an Indian version of European fascism?
Well, you can answer this question perhaps by observing what is going on today in India,
Yes.
how these organizations act today in India, especially the prosecution of the so-called minorities of Muslims, daily attacks, violent attacks on Muslims, with the excuse that they eat or they sell cow meat, or Christians who are blamed for converting Hindus and so on. The Love Jihad campaign, and so again the campaign against the so-called Love Jihad and so on. So they are, the way the Hindutva organizations behave is exactly the same way that the fascist organizations behaved against the communists, against opponents, against intellectuals, and so on, against the Jews, and so on.
Right. There is one last question. There is something very perplexing which I find in today's world, when especially when you are talking about what is happening in politics today. The RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha justified both historically as well as even now as to what was done. The kind of politics or the kind of ideas that were pursued by the fascist forces in Germany, and especially Hitler's, repression of the Jews. They were
Yes.
supportive of it. They said that it was perfectly, that kind of racial supremacy of the Germans was perfectly justified by what Hitler did. Now, in
Yeah.
today's world, I find it extremely paradoxical that India's government, which is actually rooted in Hindutva, has been backing the same forces which were persecuted by the Nazis, that is the Jews, now citizens of Israel. We have since seen for the last several years, how the entire war in Gaza has flown out and what has been the position of the government of India. Do you find this also extremely paradoxical, or can you offer some kind of an
No,
explanation?
it's not paradoxical. It seems a paradox, but it's not a paradox because one thing is being a Jew, and one thing is Zionism. Zionism is a version of fascism. It's a
Okay.
radical political organization, extreme, like the Hindu right-wing organizations and so on. Zionism is, I mean, there was a left-wing Zionism in the past, but it's no more. So this kind of Zionism is exactly like fascism or Nazi, especially Nazism. They are using the same methods, the same policies, the same, perspective, ideology of Nazism, racism, suprematism, supremacism, and you know, persecution of minorities, anti-Muslim. Nazis were anti-Muslim. They are anti. They were the Nazis were anti-Jewish, and these are anti-Muslim. But the perspective is, if not identical, very similar. historical ideologues of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha, like Savarkar, that he used to in 1937 in his political speeches when he became president of the Hindu Mahasabha. These speeches were recorded by the British police, and he used to quote, to mention the Nazi regime in Germany as a model, as an example to be followed and to be
That is
used
what
in India.
that is
Of
what
the most,
Savarkar used to tell in his speeches. That has been
and now
on record.
nowadays the picture changed, and also in Italy the right wing is supporting the Israeli government and Zionism.
Okay, so you
Not
do
only in
say,
India, all over the
that
world.
you have explained very properly that Zionism is actually a form of fascism in the modern age, and any government, any party which supports the kind of policies which have been pursued by the Israeli state, or at least been silent about it, is actually somehow or the other backing Zionism.
I was perhaps identifying Zionism entirely with the right wing is not correct, because in the past there was a left wing Zionism. I'm referring to the first colonizers of Palestine who were inspired at the kibbutz, the first kibbutz that were inspired by socialism, and they were also supported from the Soviet Union and so on. But that's a phase of Zionist history, I
Yes,
think, is over, and that a stream of Zionism is over, and nowadays Zionism
yes,
is the right
kind
wing.
of Zionism at the moment, and
The right
that
wing
is
now.
what has the support of, as you said, both the Indian government and also the Italian government. Well, thank you very much, Professor Marzia Casolari, for explaining, as to how the influences on the Indian Hindu nationalists came from Italian fascists, and to some extent also from the German fascist organizations and groups. We will talk about it probably separately at a later part in this series. But as far as Italian fascist groups and its leaders and its ideology, and the Indian Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and the Hindu Mahasabha, very well explained, and thank you very much for it. I'm sure that our viewers would have benefited immensely with the manner in which you explained things. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye bye.